plan to hold a referendum at the end of September on whether they want full independence from Iraq. Many oppose the move, including the US, but Israel has publicly backed the idea. Why is Israel so much at odds with the US on this score? And after we've all get used to the idea of a land-based Silk Road and a maritime Silk Road, how about a space Silk Road? That's what an Australian current affairs magazine is predicting. We'll be finding out what's behind it. Welcome to The Point, live from Beijing. I'm Vishini. Top government officials and political parties in Iraq's autonomous Kurdistan region have agreed to hold a referendum on independence on the 25th of September. While the US, Turkey, Syria and Iran have opposed independence for a Turkish state, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu publicly voiced his support in June, describing the Kurds as a nation of fighters who have proven political commitment and are worthy of independence. Why is Israel taking a position that appears to clash with the US preference? How important is Israeli support for the Kurds to finally claim independence? I'm pleased to be joined from Tel Aviv by Mayor Javdanfar, a Middle East analyst, and in Beijing we have Professor He Wenping, Senior Research Fellow at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Welcome to both of you. Mr. Javdanfar, Iraqi Kurds who have ethnic compatriots in Iran, Turkey and Syria have hesitated to declare full independence all along, one reason being the feared response of neighboring countries. Why are the Kurds in Iraq so determined to go ahead with the referendum now?
From what I understand, the Kurds in Iraq have decided that after an experimentation of being part of a single government with Iraqi Sunnis and with Iraqi Shia, that it's not going to work, that the experiment, that Iraq basically as a state, they have no future in it. From my understanding, the feeling is that, look, we tried to work with the Iraqi government in Baghdad. Since 2003, our wishes have been ignored. And the way they feel is that Arabs don't accept Kurds as Iraqi. They've always felt that Kurds are outsiders anyway, so the Kurds are deciding to take their future in their own hands and hold referendum. From my understanding, for example, when I speak to from a friend of one of the main Kurdish editors of a newspaper there, he wrote recently that the Kurds tried with Saddam Hussein, it didn't work. Then after Iraq was split into after Iraq basically became the government, consisted of Shiites and Kurds and Sunnis, then we had ISIS who were also Arabs, and nobody came to our help. So basically, the way they see it, they have no place in a future Iraq and they want to take their own future in their own hands. There's very little trust, there seems to be, between the Kurds in Iraq and the Arabs of Iraq.
Professor He, the Iraqi Kurdish leaders' efforts to claim independence have historically been opposed by the governments of neighboring Iran, Turkey and Syria, as well as by the US, but it has been strongly supported by Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu claims creation of a Kurdish state would aid in formation of an alliance of moderate powers in the Middle East. How grounded is his claim?
Yeah, of course, because those Kurds people has been scattered among those Arabic countries, in the neighboring countries such as the Turkey hosts the majority of them, and also Iran and Syria. So in the Iraqis, of course, none of them would like to see an independent Kurdistan within their own territory. So it's very understandable about that. But from the perspective of Israel, we all know Israel has been surrounded by all Arabic countries. They have had several wars with those Arabic countries. So the foremost concern for the Israel is the security. So they would like to have a similarity country if it is independent from a Kurdish. That will make them no longer lonely, and they will have a partner. And also they share some commonality with the Kurdish people because they thought they share some value in common. They think these these nationalities fight so hard for their own value, for their own culture, for their own own political freedom. So all of those fighting seems has the same roots like Israel has been fought through. So those similarity bound them together, and also for the security concern for the Israel side.
Mr. Javdanfa, what do you think is the message Israel is trying to send out by publicly supporting the the independence of Kurdistan, and how significant is that, given that all the other neighboring countries are against it, and the United States also?
There are several reasons why the Israeli government is supporting a free Kurdish state in northern Iraq. First and foremost, we have our own Kurdish minority in Israel, Kurdish Jews who moved to the state of Israel, who are very patriotic and very connected to Kurdish culture. We have a former defense minister, Yitzhak Mordechai, he was Kurdish. After that, we have a long-standing and once described as a romantic relationship with the Kurds of Iraq. During the 1970s, when it was in the interest of Iran and Israel to pressure Saddam Hussein, Iran and Israel joined up with the Barzani movement of Kurdish Democratic Party in northern Iraq with the Kurds. There were Israelis in Kurdistan cooperating with the Kurds in order to weaken and undermine Saddam Hussein. That was in the mid-70s with the help of the Shah of Iran. And of course, after that, in Israel, we have had a long-standing periphery doctrine. We try to look for alliances with non-Arab countries in this region. Iran was part of that, but after '79, of course, Iran turned anti-Israel. And now, today, Israel is looking for other non-Arab parties as allies in this region, and Kurdistan fits in very nicely with that. But of course, it's not enough for Israel to be supporting a free, independent Kurdistan for one single reason: we don't have a border with them. The Kurdistan's bordering countries who are opposed to this are far more important when it comes to determining its future than the State of Israel.
Professor He, how do you look at the fact that although Israel is supporting staunchly the independence of Kurdistan, they don't really share a border? How much strength, how much help is there going to be for the Kurds?
Yeah, this mutual support doesn't necessarily needs to be bordered together, because from the perspective of the Kurdish people, they need the support from Israel to lobby that the support coming from the U.S. Because people know, especially at the Trump's administration, now the Israel's relation with the U.S. now is becoming closer and closer than before. So because now the support from the U.S. to back Kurdish independence now is not accountable, because they have openly said they are not in favor for this idea, for this independence. So the Kurdish needs the lobby coming from Israel to lobby the U.S. opinion. Maybe this is one diplomatic support coming from Israel. Secondly, I think it's very practical. That is support as on those economic support, and also the military support and the technical know-how support. We all know Kurdish under the ground of the Kurdistan, they have a very rich oil resources. So those oil can be bought by the Israel side. Israel also needs this, and Israel has a very advanced, economic development level. So those support combining with those diplomatic and political support, that's the thing Kurdistan needs very much.
So, Mr. Javdanfa, are we talking about a viable solution finally to the Kurdistan issue? Are they really going to go ahead with the referendum, and possibly the result will be respected by the neighboring countries?
From what I understand, the Kurdish people in northern Iraq, they've decided that, as I mentioned, they have no future as being part of Iraq. So I don't think they're going to back down, and I can't emphasize enough the pressure which they're under. Even the United States is putting a lot of pressure on them. At long last in the Middle East, we have something that majority of the countries agree on, and that is opposition to creation of a Kurdish state, and opposition to the referendum on the 25th. Iran is against it, Turkey is against it, Iraq is against it, United States is against it, Russia is against it. So, all these countries are really pressuring the Kurds, but for domestic political purposes, the Kurdish government is unlikely to back down, because again, at long last, there's something that the very divided Kurdish politics and politicians agree on, and that's the need for referendum. In Kurdistan, the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan and the KDP, the Kurdish Democratic Party, they're deeply, deeply divided on many issues. But on this issue, they're united, and it's very unlikely that they're going to back down. Will this resolve all of Kurdistan's problems? No, there are domestic problems. And of course, Kurdistan needs to trade with its neighbors in the future. So in the short to medium term, this is likely to actually accelerate problems. But in the long term, I think the neighboring countries are likely to come to live with the notion of an independent Kurdistan for whatever that means. But, you know, as long as the Kurds don't have access to the sea, it's going to be very difficult for them to be truly independent in this region.
Professor He, in case, okay, let's say the referendum can go ahead, but with all of these oppositions we're talking about, almost, you know, every country are against it. Let's not forget that Turkey is vehemently against it, right? The opposition leader also talking about if the Kurds go ahead with a referendum, that's like a declaration of war. Or how possible that, although we can have a referendum, that it can be successful at all?
Yeah, I'm not so optimistic about this independence, in de facto independence, because even though this referendum can be go ahead, but I think those leaders of Kurdish people, they maybe were not there enough to make a formal announcement now saying we are independent, because they have to face those very harsh reality. All those countries around them, except Israel, even not bothered with them. So all the countries bothered with them, and they have to take care, take very much concern. Those countries, they're all against them, especially Turkey, you mentioned, because the PKK in Turkey, now that's the biggest worry for the Turkish government. So I think Turkish people now under the leadership of Erdogan, now they are also bold enough to do anything. So I think this will make those Kurdish leaders will have a second thought about what kind of real action they were going to take. Maybe the referendum results coming from saying yes, they want independence, but to make a real announcement about the independence, I think they maybe take a little bit long thinking, because referendum results can give an idea, can give a message, can be delivered to all those neighboring countries, including the US, and also including the the voice coming from Israel, saying this is the voice from our people. That's enough. Maybe people get this message. But later on, the politicians will have a second thought about whether this is good for their real interests.
And also, I guess there is the legal aspect, the technical aspect of really becoming independent. Mr. Javdanfar, let's take a look at the kind of implications this is going to have on Israel's relationship with the United States, if any. I mean, you know, Israel is not agreeing when U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson asked the Kurdish government to postpone the referendum and called for dialogue between Kurdish region and Baghdad. How do you look at the difference between Israel and the U.S.'s position on this issue? Is that going to affect anything at all?
Generally, I don't think the difference is going to impact the relations between Israel and the United States. I think what worries Israel more is Turkey. The Turkish government, as my colleague said quite rightly, we hear very strong opposition voices, and some of the members of the opposition has even threatened war against Kurdistan. I'm not so sure that the Turks are going to go to war against them, but at the same time, I think any Israeli confirmation or support for a Kurdish independent state could put further strains on our relationship with the government of President Erdogan. And this is an important government in the region for reasons that we all know. Turkey is a very important geostrategic player, and more importantly, when it comes to Israel, Turkey now is a customer. You know, we're going to sell gas to them. Israel has discovered gas resources, and you know, the old saying, customer is always right. So there's only so much we can push President Erdogan. So here, what Erdogan thinks of our stance towards Kurdistan is much more important and is likely to have a bigger impact than what President Trump thinks.
Okay, Mr. Javdanfar, Middle East analyst, and Professor He Wenping, Senior Research Fellow at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Many thanks to the two. And you have been watching The Point with me, Li Xin. We'll take a short break and we'll be back right after this. China's Space Silk Road initiative is the Australian Strategic Policy Institute's magazine, The Strategist, predicted in an article published earlier this month. Citing China's white paper on space activities released last December, it speculated China is looking to add a space Silk Road to its proposed land-based Belt and Road Initiative. Attaching too many implications to the Belt and Road Initiative's space information corridor mentioned in the white paper, the strategist believes that the Belt and Road countries will subscribe to use China's Beidou satellites for precision navigation and timing services, and that will give Beijing greater power to control their policy choices. Is there any credibility to such a speculation? Has China's Beidou system become a rival to the US's GPS system? Joining me for the discussion is Professor Zhang Fan, Associate Professor of Astronomy at Beijing Normal University, and Xu Qingduo, a current affairs commentator. Gentlemen, welcome to the show, and thank you very much. Now, the strategist speculation about China's space Silk Road was based on an interpretation of the 2016 China White Paper on space activities that was released at the end of last year. Mr. Xu, why do you think this story is getting the attention from the Australian media right now?
Well, you have to understand Australia and their attitudes toward the One Belt and Road Initiative. Basically, it's twofold. For the regional government, like the Victoria government, the state government is very much eager to cooperate with China, to welcome investment from China on the infrastructure construction, because that will create jobs, will create money simply for the local government. But on the federal government level, there are a lot of suspicions about China's Belt and Road Initiative. So this strategist is part of that. His interpretation, you can see he basically urged the other countries not to subscribe to the China's Belt and Road or Space Silk Road.
So-called.
Yes, so-called Space Silk Road. That's what he called about that. Obviously, there's a misunderstanding about that's based on the misunderstanding of China's Belt and Road Initiative. Remember, Australia view this, at least some of them in the government view this as China's competition with the U.S. for primacy in the Asia-Pacific region. Australia is basically very much embedded to U.S. in terms of national security. Yeah. There's saying if Washington asked Canberra to jump, the only question Canberra will ask is like how high. So you can see there's a
So that's the
concern.
big picture. Yeah, that's the big picture we're talking perspective, Professor Zhang. In the white paper, China mentions the construction of a Belt and Road Initiative Space Information Corridor. Exactly what does that mean? How does China propose to cooperate with these countries in terms of space information?
So basically, the white paper was not proposing a separate new initiative. The space thing is just an integral part of the existing Belt and Road Initiative, which on an operational level is really a basket of infrastructure projects being offered to these countries. And space infrastructure is also infrastructure. There's three specific areas of space program: remote sensing, telecommunications, and the Beidou navigation system. They're particularly utility-like parts of the program, and they are offered in the whole basket, just like any other infrastructure projects as commercial contracts, basically.
So, what is the cooperation model China proposes with the Belt and Road countries? For instance, if is there some kind of you have to take it, or is the how does it work?
Well, it's just like any other thing in the Belt and Road Initiative. Nothing can be mandatory, right? You can't tell other people to use it.
What is the idea of a space information corridor vis-a-vis the so-called Space Silk Road that the Australian magazine was talking about?
So it's just a part of the Belt and Road Initiative. So this thing is. So China does not have any capability to force other people to use its space infrastructure. All of those are just commercial offerings, and if any country does not like the service offered by the Chinese systems, they can go out and solicit a bid from any commercial entities. Any of those three particular systems, they're not unique in the world, and there are private companies even that offers competitive services too.
Now, Mr. Xu, what do you think of this kind of imagination that have been attached to China's proposal of a space information corridor vis-a-vis the so-called Space Silk Road?
As Mr. Professor Zhang mentioned, this is a part of the infrastructure. Infrastructure including, of course, road, railway system on the land, of course, seaport, river ports. That's in terms of this sea road, let's say, connection. And then it's about like the space. That's also a part of the connection issue. Like China have launched a series of satellite services for countries in Southeast Asia, like Indonesia, Thailand, Laos. They are enjoying the service from China. This is a part of what you can provide to your customers. It's really about based on the equality. If you think this service meet your demands, you go for it. Otherwise, you can choose from any other services. So there's no problem with that. But this, this understanding, by calling it like a space Silk Road, I think, as I said, it's based on this like a geo-strategic thinking. It sees like China as somehow a rising rival against the U.S. primacy, especially in Asia-Pacific region.
Yeah. Well, China enhanced the service capability of its Beidou 2 global system, right? And China wants to start providing basic services to countries in 2018 and form a network consisting 35 satellites for global service by 2020. Professor Zhang, how competitive is the Beidou system? And if you're really talking about competition, how threatening it could be to the GPS system?
So actually, there are four different, not just two, four different global positioning systems. The GPS from the US, Beidou from China, GLONASS from Russia, and then Galileo from the European Union. And they're technologically very similar, actually. And you can actually use all four together to get much better accuracy. So they're not exactly competitive against each other. But Beidou has some extra features. For example, you can send text messages through it, distress signals, for example. That would be very helpful. And it's actually a very cute feature because it's a navigation system. So by definition, you're always in contact with multiple satellites. So it's a highly redundant and very reliable system for sending us those sort of distress signals. So, yeah.
Is there any possibility that once these countries adopt the Beidou system and choose it among the four systems you talk about, that Beijing can just shut down the system at will and control these countries and maybe even threaten them, if you don't use it, we're going to do this and that? Is there any technical possibility in that case?
The short answer is no. A long answer is absolutely no. So
a longer answer.
Right. So the satellite, what the satellite does is it just broadcasts stuff. Whoever is using it for free. It's just picking up the signals and do whatever you want with it to compute your locations. So if somebody wants to switch over to the other satellite systems, they can do that. Nobody would even know. There's no contract to get off. So yeah, China wouldn't even know what you're using.
At this particular moment, what's the percentage, let's say, of share of space information share among these four systems?
Almost 90-some percent GPS. GPS is completely dominating. And then the Russian system has been in existence roughly for the same duration as the GPS system, but because of the collapse of the Soviet Union, sort of it got interrupted for a while. They're trying to get back in the game. So some of the chips, like Qualcomm puts out, can use GLONASS now, and some of them, for example, especially the Chinese mobile phones, they can start using Beidou. So in terms of market share, the other systems are minuscule as compared to the GPS. But as I said, they're not competitive. Once you have GPS, you can add on addition to the GPS Beidou, right?
So it's actually not really a competition, right? And it's
right.
And it's not like if it is mine, it's not yours. Basically, you can have it at the same time.
Exactly. So if Beidou matures, and because it actually offers a lot in terms of additional accuracy. Because if you're in a highly densely populated region with a lot of high-rise buildings, you can't see many satellites. So if you can see one more Beidou satellite instead of a GPS satellite, you can use that instead of the GPS system.
So it's a good thing that you have a second or fourth choice, let's say.
So as soon as the system matures, the switch over from one system to using all four systems will be like almost instantaneous, I would predict.
When will that be?
So 2020 is when Chinese system goes fully online. Okay. 2019 is the European one. So
yeah, Mr. Xu, is to have more choices than having to rely solely on one provider.
Absolutely. As the author suggested, somehow, China will force those Belt and Road countries to subscribe to the Chinese service. This is based on more or less ignorance, without a full understanding of this complementary nature of those different systems like Beidou and GPS instead of rivalry against each other.
Thank you very much for the technical explanation and from a political point of view. And they have been Zhang Fan, Associate Professor of Astronomy at Beijing Normal University, and Xu Qingduo, a current affairs commentator. And my last point, Beidou can be regarded as a kind of a digital glue for the roads, railways, ports and industrial parks that China is investing and building with its partners around the world. But warnings that by signing up to the Belt and Road Space Information Corridor that these countries would become dependent on or controlled by China in their policy choices are just far-fetched. There are already plenty of space imaging companies that are able to provide high-resolution commercial services, and there are plenty of other space capabilities either being developed or already in place which aren't operated by Beijing. Given the rapid changing nature of global space industry, it can be said that these published concerns are alarmist, to say the least. And that's all from this edition of The Point with me, Li Xin. As always, you can follow us on Twitter or visit our Facebook page using the handle The Point with LX. Download the application called CGTN Live to watch our show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point.